In 2 Corinthians 3, Paul says in verse 3, you are manifestly an epistle of Christ, ministered by us, written not with ink, but by the Spirit of the living God, not on tablets of stone, but on tablets of the flesh, that is, of the heart. See, the biggest failing of the Old Testament was not the Old Testament itself. It was not God's law. God's law is perfect. The biggest failing was the people and how the people of Israel took and viewed the law. They saw the law written on tablets of stone, and they treated it just as a law instead of treating it like a law being written on their hearts, where the obedience that they showed was not obedience because of their hearts and their hearts being connected to God. Their obedience was strictly because of the law itself and not because it was a law of God. So, in that, they were separating their faith or their obedience. They were making it just obedience. And that's what the Bible is talking about in other passages when it mentions works and not being saved by our works and the weakness of our own works. When we use our works as trying to be works of righteousness to God apart from faith, we're doing the same thing the nation of Israel did that God was displeased with. And then he further on continues this thought in verse 5. He says, not that we are sufficient of ourselves to think anything as being from ourselves, but our sufficiency is from God. So Paul is trying to get them to understand our sufficiency is God. What sustains us is God. We don't sustain ourselves. Our own obedience apart from being obedient to God because of faith and love, that means nothing. So in verse 6, he finishes up this thought and says, who also made us sufficient as ministers of the new covenant. God made us sufficient. God sustains us as ministers of the new covenant, not of the letter, but of the spirit. For the letter kills, but the spirit gives life. If we look at God's word, as simply as a rule book, a law of rules and law of rule book. If that's how we look at God's word, we're failing. That's not obedience. That's not faith. We have to look at it as God's word and we obey it, not because it's law. We obey it because it's God's word and we love God from the heart. You want any more clarity on this and you want to study about this, please let us know. You can give us an email at letthebiblespeak843 at gmail.com or give us a text at 843-553-5157.